new report in the Wall Street Journal alleges women who interviewed for Bill Gates' private office were asked sexually explicit questions. Female candidates were questioned about information ranging from sexual history, past drug use, and other details pertaining to their private lives.
According to the paper, women who sought employment with Gates' ventures faced extreme vetting about their history that might have been vulnerable to blackmail. A spokeswoman for the billionaire's private office denied having any knowledge of such questions being posed by third-party contractors, saying, quote, "This line of questioning would be unacceptable and a violation of Gates Ventures' agreement with the contractor." Gates, who himself had extramarital affairs, has been extensively criticized for having a relationship with pedophile Jeffrey Epstein after he was convicted of sex crimes. Gates has since said that maintaining a relationship with the disgraced financier was a, quote, "mistake." So to start, I don't know how it's a mistake to be friends with a convicted pedophile, but I don't have $1 billion, so maybe I just can't understand. But these questions seem like they were really invasive and really private about women. I'm surprised that a lawsuit hasn't been brought yet, because this type of thing is typically protected by employment law, although we know lots of corporate leaders don't like to follow that either.
Right, yeah. And there's always these predatory kinds of NDAs that you have to sign. And I'm sure that the type of person who is applying for a job at Gates Ventures isn't the type of person who has a ton of money for a lawyer at the time of application to kind of vet the process and what they're going through. And so women frequently in the workplace are put in precarious positions by bosses and superiors who are using their position of power to make sexual advances. This sounds entirely inappropriate and is unfortunately all too common. And Bill Gates has this weird reputation of being like such a good guy. This is someone who's buying up a lot of land, a lot of water, a lot of resources in Africa. I just think anyone who's a billionaire who is hoarding resources, even if he's saying, well, this is for my research to help people with health problems in Africa, there's always this ulterior motive. It just doesn't sit right with me that wealthy people are hoarding resources like he does. He's really not the good guy that he's probably paid a PR firm a lot of money to make it seem like he is in the public eye. And so something like this coming out about him, unfortunately, not at all surprising, knowing how common this is in the workplace for women, but also knowing how billionaires act when they have a ton of money. They tend to get in these really unequal sexual relationships, and I don't know what's going on psychologically where that is something that they want. Perhaps a lot of money changes you, or vice versa. The type of person who wants that kind of relationship will seek that exorbitant amount of wealth.
Yeah, it is weird that Bill Gates has this sort of affable, nerdy persona that people have glommed onto. Meanwhile, as you said, he's buying up tons of land in the United States, farmland in particular, which he claims he is very directly involved in. So you have this guy who's supposed to be a computer nerd who claims to be involved in farming now. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And he's also someone who invested heavily in the COVID vaccines while telling people that everyone had to get vaccinated. So he had perverse incentives there. He is on board with this whole idea of a great reset and new global order. And it's all just very movie villainesque, very sci-fi villainesque. And this seems like the latest story to add to this growing list of evidence that Bill Gates is not this nice guy that everybody thought he was. What's interesting about this story, about the questions that were being asked of women who were interviewing, is the potential blackmail aspect. It almost seems like, as opposed to being some kind of sexual thing, that maybe they were trying to dig up dirt on these women so that they could hold it over their heads if anything were to come down the line at their job that they felt like maybe they wanted to report, or they wanted to leave, or they wanted to share something negative about the Gates venture. The superiors could come back and say, well, if you do that, then I'm going to tell everybody that you did this. And that is almost grosser in a way, because it's so Machiavellian than just the idea of these women being sexualized in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And it's not a stretch of logic by any means to think that's what could have been going on, especially because these were women interviewing for a position where they'd be relatively high up or at least working in an office where people who are very high up are on a daily basis. And so would they be around when conversations are had that maybe they wouldn't want being public? Yes. And is an NDA always enough to protect people from exposing information? No, because an NDA is not going to protect them from describing information pertinent to crimes. What would prevent them from telling people information about people at the executive level at Gates Ventures talking about things that are criminal in nature is if they had some dirt on them that they didn't want public about their personal lives. I think it absolutely tracks that this could have been a blackmail kind of a situation. And sounds to me that if it's happening at a place like Gates Ventures, this could be a prevalent problem with billionaires' ventures and the staff that they hold. I don't think Bill Gates would be the only one employing this practice. We've heard a lot about folks high up in the largest corporations in the world doing similar things when they have mergers and business dealings, wanting to have blackmail on the people that they're engaging in dealings with. This is a very common problem. And it's a disgusting one because, at least in the case of those mergers, they're at least on equal footing when it comes to the power structure or the pyramid you have of who is in power in a corporation. Not really the case, it sounds like, in this office.
The idea of blackmail in relation to the Gates venture is interesting, too, because this is something that is brought up in speculation about how Jeffrey Epstein was able to build his wealth and get close to all of these billionaires. People who studied his rise to power for a long time say that they believe that Jeffrey Epstein was able to manage all of these people's money and develop relationships with them because he would put them in compromising situations, perhaps with young girls, and use that as blackmail so that they continue giving their money to him. So I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence either that Bill Gates was friends with this guy who was employing some of the same tactics against the people whose wealth he managed, as it seems Gates Ventures might be using against the women that they hire. And I think it's a shame that when we look back a few years ago at the Me Too movement, which I think started out of good intentions, that it became so politicized and weaponized, because there is obviously still a real phenomenon of women being treated unfairly in the workplace. And that needed to be addressed. But because there were certain people who were allowed off the hook, because the people in charge of Time's Up and Me Too were personally friendly with them, or because they sat on the right side of the political aisle, really discredited what should have been a legitimate endeavor to make sure that women are not subjected to this kind of behavior when they're at work.
Yeah, it can't be we will believe and protect women so long as the people they are accusing are not people who are our friends or who are politically convenient for us to have in our good graces. That just doesn't make sense. That's not how justice works. It needs to be applied evenly regardless of someone's position of power or how useful they are to you. And so, yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I hope that these women come forward, and I hope that there's a lawsuit and justice is brought for all of these women that were put in these uncomfortable positions in a way that their business is not made public through that legal process. All right, we've got to leave this story here, but we've got more Rising for you after this.